Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much again. Thank you for being with us. This morning, what I wanted to do, we're coming up on a time of the liturgical calendar in our country, which is recognized as Palm Sunday. This is the Sunday before Easter. And whether you grew up in a Christian church or not, it's kind of impossible to miss the symbolism, excuse me, of this time of the year, the symbolism of Easter. Now, of course, we're going to talk a lot more about Easter and the ancient origins of Easter and some of the symbolism of colored eggs and chicks and things like that. But really, we understand that that theme of the Easter time is this renewal, this coming out of the tomb, so to speak. We know that you take a seed, which is life encapsulated in a protective shell, and you put it in the ground, and it shatters that shell, and it comes forth out of the ground anew. And that symbolism is what applies to the placing of the body of the crucified Jesus into the tomb to be resurrected, to come forward again in a new and different way. And that's what this part of the year is about. The symbolism of renewal existed long before Christianity. But it's a perfect metaphor for our spiritual growth. It is a perfect symbolism for what we must do if we are to continue on our spiritual growth. It is that shattering of the protective shell of our egos, the collection of ideas that we hold about who and what we are and the way the world works, most of which are not even true. And it's allowing those to dissolve into the nothingness from which they came, so that that seed within us, that seed of truth that is already here, that little spark of the divine that is already here, may sprout, may put forward its shoots, may move out of the constrictions that we have applied to ourselves, usually to protect ourselves. But it can move beyond those restrictions and be born fully anew within us. Joseph Campbell, in trying to define what God is, this is a very important point that nobody talks about. Most religions talk about they believe in God, but they don't come right down to explaining what kind of God they believe in. And if you read the posts on the internet from the groups that don't believe in God, they very freely talk about not believing in God, but they don't define what kind of God they don't believe in. It's kind of one of those words that means different things to different people, and probably it has a different meaning for everybody. In other words, if there's 1,000 people in a room and we mention the word God, there's 1,000 different understandings of what that means. And yet we never take the time to communicate and say, well, what do you mean by that? And Joseph Campbell was talking about this, and he said that God, the word God, is a metaphor for everything that transcends the boundaries of human consciousness. Everything that transcends the boundaries of human consciousness. Our human consciousness understands beginnings and middles and ends. We understand that we are born and that we live and that we die. And yet God is eternal, was never born, shall never die, just always is. Our human consciousness understands time, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But that which we call God is eternal. It is without time. And there's a difference between eternity and eternal. And eternity just means something that goes on and on and on forever. Eternal is without a sense of time. It is just being. It is just the isness, the I am that the scriptures give us. So it is very important to us to take time to think about what we mean by these terms. And perhaps the few terms that we can focus on that people might recognize and agree upon is omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. That which we call God is the metaphor which represents omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. So what that means is that it is all right here. It is all right now. That the unity of all life, the oneness, is right here, right now. There can be no separation in the mind of God. You remember there was a movie, Peter Sellers' movie, many years ago, Dr. Strangelove. And in the movie there was a character who had an arm. It wasn't his original arm. I believe it was an arm that was transplanted onto him in some sort of experiment. And yet the arm hated him, and the arm was always trying to kill him. And this was kind of a running gag throughout the movie of people finding him choking himself because his arm didn't like him. And we want to think about how silly that is. How silly it is to think that one part of us doesn't like another part of us. Our left foot doesn't like our right foot. It's impossible. It's impossible for us to imagine that. And we must recognize then that it is impossible for the divine, which is everything, which has created everything out of itself, it is impossible for it to like one part more than another, to love one part and to hate another part, to reward one part and to punish another part. And this is what we're told in the scriptures, that God sends the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. And remember, that verse was given to us in a desert where rain was a very precious thing. So this time of renewal that we come to every year, that we come to around Easter, that leads up to the theme of death and resurrection, the planting in the soil, the sprouting of the new life. This is a time for us to go back in and shake up our old ideas, till the soil of the consciousness, if you will. Shake up the old ideas and the old activities, and perhaps even some complacency that we may have slipped into in our spiritual practice. You know, as we all sit out the cold winter in front of the fire, enjoying the fruit of last year's harvest, it's easy, if you will, to get a little bit lazy. And in the springtime, we have to get over that. We have to go out and get busy. We have to start working the soil, you know. The old stiff muscles and the weak backs and all of those things will present themselves to us. But we know that we have to. We know that if we don't go out there and get busy, that we won't be able to have a harvest next year. So it's wonderful to think about these things. It's wonderful to go back and ask ourselves, well, what is it that I know? What is it that I believe? What kind of a God do I believe in? And how am I going to dedicate myself this year to commit myself to the most important thing that I will ever do, which is to experience the presence of God. That's the only thing worth having, the only thing to pursue. All else is just, as the Buddhists might call it, a false appetite, a false desire, something that we are really pursuing in a misguided attempt to discover the divine, to pursue it in people or substance or circumstance or pleasure, when really what we want is the experience of God. Our hearts remain restless until they repose in thee. We will constantly be searching until we find that which has been looking for us, that which is inside of us, that which is already here and already present, that is waiting to reveal itself to us. As Meister Eckhart said, God is like the child who plays hide and seek and clears its throat so you will find him. The love and the presence is already here. So we want to take a brief look at the traditional story of Palm Sunday. And I have to tell you that as a child growing up, this is one part of the liturgical calendar that was always a bit confusing to me. You know, I was an altar boy when I was young, and we used to prepare the palms for the Sunday service. They would come in big boxes, and the palm branches were all bundled together at a root, I guess, where they cut it off of the tree. And we had to borrow a saw from our parents, and we had to show up at church before the Palm Sunday celebration with our saw, each of us. And we had to cut the end off of the palm branch, which allowed the palms, the little strips of palms that you might be familiar with, to be freed. And then, of course, those would be passed out for the Sunday service. And during the Sunday service, everybody held their palms in the air and read the scriptures for Palm Sunday and tried to recreate it. And what was always confusing to me as I looked at the scriptures, I tried to understand it. It just seemed so out of place with the other things that were going on and being written about. Here we have almost an angrier Jesus, a meaner Jesus, if you dare to think of it in those terms. But he came into Jerusalem for the Passover holiday. Now we have to remember that Judaism of that day was a temple-based religion. What that meant was the adherents had to go to the temple at least once or twice a year for certain key holy days. And they had to show up. So people were coming from all over the countryside. People were coming from all over. Like you might see today, people who make a pilgrimage to Mecca. You know, we see the pictures of this, of millions of people going to this holy shrine in Mecca to fulfill a religious obligation. And you can think of it perhaps in those terms, that we had people coming from all over who were going into Jerusalem. And you can imagine what it would be like. You can imagine it was sort of a festival atmosphere. Families were getting to see distant relatives. You know, it was like a big family reunion. People were coming together. They were happy to see one another. There was great excitement. Cousins meeting cousins that they hadn't seen for 6 months, for a year. And there was great commotion going on. And in the midst of this, we have, according to the story, we have the arrival of Jesus. And Jesus comes into Jerusalem, and he's riding a donkey, and he's being welcomed by the people, and they're celebrating him, and they're shouting out, Hosanna in the highest, and they're waving their palm branches. This is the story that we're given. And he comes into Jerusalem, and he immediately sets about creating trouble, I guess is the way that the Romans saw it. He immediately sets about trying to right some wrongs in a very vocal way of things that people were doing. So this is where we get the stories where he went into the temple and he overturned the tables of the sellers, and he kind of chewed them out. Now you have to remember, people were coming from all over, and they had different ways of paying for things. But when they got to the temple, they had to have a standard way of paying for things. They had to have a standard offerings, you know, like maybe 2 turtle doves or things like that were offerings that they had to take and present to the temple priests. So there were money changers that were set up in the courtyard of the temple, and people would come in whatever currency they happened to have, whether it be, you know, Syrian currency or whatever. It was changed into a coin that was acceptable to the temple. And then there were people there who were selling the offerings, the turtle doves and all of the other things that people needed in order to fulfill their religious obligations. So there was a market that was set up there. And the tables that the sellers used were things that they carried on their shoulders, not like you would think at a flea market where people have a wooden table. But these were tables that the vendors carried around on their shoulders. So Jesus went through and tipped these things off of their shoulders, and yelled at them, that they were missing the point. They were missing the point of the whole purpose of the temple and the whole purpose of the Passover celebration, and they were turning it into a commercial event, much like we've taken Christmas today and turned it into a commercial event. And Jesus went on then, and he chastised the educated people and told them, that there were other people who were going to hear the word, who were going to do the work of the Father and these kind of things, and created this great attention to himself, according to the story, which eventually led to the Romans taking him, and as we're told in the story, the Romans taking him at the instigation of the high priests in the temple. And here's this crowd that welcomed him earlier in the week, riding the donkey. Oh, by the way, the symbol of the donkey was the kings that came riding the donkeys came in peace. If they were coming to do war, they came in riding their steeds, the horses that they could use to charge through you. But if a king arrived on a donkey, it was symbolic that the king arrived as in a sign of peace. So here we have Jesus arriving on a donkey, and of course Matthew tells us that it's fulfilling the scriptures of old. People are shouting and celebrating. They're laying their coats down on the ground, in a recognition of who and what he was. And then less than a week later, they turn their backs on him. And they say, crucify him and let his blood be on us and on our children. And I always said, it just never made sense to me. I'm just trying to figure all that out. What is this all about? Here's this man who had been preaching to the poor people on the hillside and talking to them about love and about finding God and going within and finding the kingdom. And then all of a sudden, we have kind of like this very, an agitator, if you will. So there's a couple things going on that historically we need to touch on before we can get into what I want to offer as my interpretation of the meaning today. But I want to put this out so that people can put it into some sort of a context. And we have to remember that Palestine at that time was a tinderbox. You think it's a tinderbox now? Well, it was a tinderbox then. The state of Israel was occupied by the Romans. Now the Israelites had invited the Romans in to help them kick the Greeks out because the Greeks were just, terrible to them. And then turns out the Romans were even worse. So here's a group of people who keep asking themselves, why is God allowing this to happen to us? What are we doing? What's going on here? Why must we suffer? We're supposed to be the chosen people, and yet we're being punished for some reason. And from time to time, leaders would rise up, messiahs, people who were going to save them from the Romans. They were going to lead a rebellion against the Romans. And the Romans had zero tolerance policy for this. For those people who appeared to be troublemakers, they just took them out and they nailed them to a tree or to a wall or to a cross or something. And typically they let their bodies hang there until they rotted, so that the birds of the air would come and pluck away the flesh and all of the things that you read about in the scriptures. So the Romans were very brutal, and Pontius Pilate was very brutal. Pontius Pilate was in fact removed as the governor of Palestine for being too brutal. So here you have this great tinderbox. You have this great tinderbox where the Romans are watching very, very closely for any sign, any instigation of anything that looks like it's going to cause problems, and there's zero tolerance. They're just going to take whoever it is out and they're going to get rid of them. That's what they're doing. So in the midst of all this, you have these thousands and thousands of people coming, and they're celebrating, and they would carry palm branches and olive branches. They would carry them in with them. They didn't do this just because Jesus was coming in. They did this because that's what they did. They would come in and they would be waving these things in the air, and they would be singing, and they would be celebrating, and it was a great, people were high on the spirit, I guess is the way that you might put it. They were very excited, they were very enthusiastic. They were very joyful. And it is in the midst of all this that the gospel writers place the entrance, that they call it, if you look it up on the internet, the triumphant entrance of Jesus to Jerusalem. And they have him riding this donkey as a symbol that he is the Prince of Peace. They have him riding this donkey because They're trying to demonstrate, excuse me, that this entrance is a fulfillment of something that was prophesied a long time ago. Remember, these books were written after the fact, and each writer had a purpose, and a lot of times they were trying to explain things backwards and saying, well, we know that he was, in fact, the Son of God because he rode this donkey, and it said back here in this old scripture that that when the Messiah came, the one who would save the people from all of their trouble, that he would be riding the donkey. So a lot of it is kind of written backwards. They kind of write it backwards. You'll see that the story goes on then about how he went in, and now he's being very critical of the establishment, which was the Jewish establishment at the time. He's being very, very critical of them, and he's causing trouble, and he's turning over the tables at the temple and telling them that they're not leading their lives the right way. And he's arguing with the elders, and he's telling them that there are other people who are going to take the word, and they're going to hear the word, and they're going to be better servants of God. And what all this is about is the writers are trying to take Christianity out of the realm of Judaism, and they're trying to make it a religion that appeals to the whole world. After the temple was sacked by the Romans in 66 AD, excuse me while I get a drink, Judaism as it had existed no longer existed. There was no longer a temple to go to. There was no longer a place where people could get together once or twice a year and come and celebrate their religion and have their religious holidays. And in many respects, early Christianity no longer existed, because what we know as Christianity, the early Christianity, was in fact a part of Judaism. The people who were people who were following Jesus didn't perceive themselves as being different than the Jewish people at the time. They were the Jewish people of the time. They followed the same religion. They followed the same traditions. But Judaism had been destroyed for all practical purposes. It was going through a great upheaval. It had to reinvent itself after this. And the early followers of Jesus, they were also destroyed and run out of Jerusalem. So there was this kind of gap of where does Christianity go? What is it? It changes, it evolves, it becomes. And Paul comes along and is trying to take it into the rest of the world. And this is why if you read the scripture, you'll see the arguments between Paul and Peter, about whether the followers of Jesus need to follow the kosher rules and be circumcised and all these kind of things. Is Christianity just for people who are Jewish, or is Christianity for everybody? And Paul is trying to take this out into the rest of the world, which is a Roman world, the Roman-controlled world in the Mediterranean. So by having these stories here of Jesus arguing with the elders in the temple and condemning them and telling them that there are others who are coming who are going to be better servants of the word, the scriptures there are opening the door to say, now this religion, this Christianity, this idea is for you, not just for those people who heard it and those people who didn't obey. And of course what this did was it bred anti-Semitism and put anti-Semitism in the Gospels. It has the Gospels showing the Jews as being the killers of the Christ. The Jews are shouting out, crucify him, and let his blood be on us, and all these things. And it's all a literary device that is designed to kind of allow Paul to take Christianity out into the Roman world. They have Pontius Pilate, who, as I said, was an an abusive man. They have him acting as a pussycat, saying, "I really don't want to kill this man. I'll wash my hands of this whole thing. His blood is on you." They have this ritual where the Romans are going to release a condemned prisoner in honor of the Jewish holiday, when historically you're not going to find that ritual existed. And then you have the Romans releasing Barabbas, who was an insurrectionist, right, a revolutionary. They released Barabbas, and instead they crucified Jesus, which was never going to happen. If you were in charge of an area that was a tinderbox, and you had somebody who was a revolutionary, you're not going to let him go. Pontius Pilate was not going to let him go. So all of these things are literary devices. They are contrived, and I want you to understand that people who we're writing these things, we're writing them for a specific purpose or purposes, so they are not necessarily historically true. And then we got to say, well, if they're not necessarily historically true, then what is the point of even talking about them? What can it mean to us today? And that's what was troubling me as a child. That was what was troubling me. What does it mean that these people, they welcome Jesus, they wave the palm branches, and then within a week they turned their backs on him and cried out for his blood? And what it means to me, what I bring it down today, for me today, that I want to share with you. And it may not mean the same thing to you, and that's okay. Each of us has to go inside. Each of us has to find our own definitions and our own understandings. But it reminds me of the fact that we all from time to time get very enthusiastic about things. We get very excited about things. We jump up and make commitments about things. This is it. This is wonderful. I'm going to give myself completely to this. And it doesn't matter in our society. It doesn't matter what it is. It may be a new diet. It may be a new method of exercise. It may be a new way of looking at religion. But what we tend to do is we tend to jump in and we tend to get so excited. If you read the email I sent out last night, it reminded me of when I was a commissioned salesman, and we would have the sales rallies once a year, and everybody would go in, and for the whole week they're just pumping everybody up with positive ideas and telling them how wonderful they are, and recognizing the people who made outstanding sales. And then of course the final night, they've been building the emotion up to a crescendo, and then the final night they say, and this year, the people who are going to make it into the President's Club, they're going to sell whatever the number is, 200,000, 200 million, it didn't matter, depending on what you were selling, who you were selling for. Now, how many of you are willing to commit yourselves to be up on this stage next year, to be recognized as members of the President's Club by going back to your districts and making those sales? And of course, everybody in the room stands up. Everybody gets up. Everybody is just whipped up on emotion. Everybody's excited. Everybody's ready to take the pledge. Yes, we're going to do it. And of course, what happens is you go back to reality. You get back on the airplane, and you go home. And now you've got to start doing the work. Now you've got to start making your cold calls. Now you've got to start finding your prospects. You've got to go out and make your presentations and close your sales. And it's just as much work as it was before you got excited and stood up and pledged yourself to be in the President's Club next year. So what happens for many people is that after the excitement of making the commitment, after the great rush of the enthusiasm, after this running forward and saying, yes, I will, we go back home and we go, wow, what was I thinking? This is a lot more work than I realized. This is going to be a lot more difficult than I realized. That quota that they gave us, my goodness, it's almost impossible to reach, particularly with my territory. I mean, maybe they don't understand. My territory is not as rich as the one in LA or the one in New York City might be, and I'm going to have to work twice as hard as anybody, and we start rationalizing away all of the reasons why we can't do what we said we would do. So there's a big flash in the pan, There's this big initial spark, and then nothing happens after that. And that happens in our spiritual growth as well. It happens in all areas of our lives. We have a little spark. We hear a motivational talk. We read an inspirational book. We go to a retreat or to a seminar, to a conference. We meet a lot of like-minded people. And we really get excited. We really get excited about our spiritual growth. We hear the words, and the words resonate with us. The presence of God is within. The power of God is within. The kingdom is within. Seek first the kingdom. You are more than your circumstances. You are more than skin and bones. Discover it. Discover it. Come to me. Come to the presence of the divine within. and all your needs will be taken care of. Seek ye first the kingdom, and everything else shall be added unto you. And there's something that kindles within us, because that desire is already within us. You see, when we were created, from the moment of creation, that desire to discover the presence of God was there within us, and it is still there, and it won't go away. It won't go away. The poet called it the spark that can be desecrated but never destroyed. It will not go away. It will not leave us alone. It waits patiently, and at the right time and in the right place, it reveals itself to us and says, come to me. Come to me. Come and know me. Come and experience me. And it kindles something within us, and our desire to come to know God is renewed. Maybe like the people who have been taking the winter off, maybe we have become a little lax or complacent in our spiritual practice, or maybe it's just time for us to move and to take it up a notch. You know, the Emerald School of spiritual growth. Bam, let's take it up a notch. But something kindles within us, and something moves, and we get excited, and we say, this is the year that I'm going to do it. This is the year that I'm going to dedicate more time to my spiritual practice. This is the year that I am going to exclude all distractions from my life. The TVs, the newspapers, the people who just drone on and on and on about politics, about nothing. And today, this year, I am going to focus my intention entirely on thee. The words of the mystic. I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. I only want the experience of God. So we wave the palm branches, and we sing Hosanna in the highest, and we take off our cloaks and we lay them on the road. And tears come to our eyes. And we are just so happy. We're so overwhelmed that we have been given the privilege to experience the love and the presence of God within us. And that is the only thing that we want. But then something happens sometimes. We go back to the real world. We go back to work. We leave the conference center. We leave that environment perhaps where we had the experience, and we have to go back to the normal things of life. And we forget. The enthusiasm wanes, and we forget. And well, yes, I do want to do that, but I have to take care of the things at hand first. I have to take care of the business here first. I have to do all of these other things. And what happens is we turn our backs, so to speak. We turn our backs on our commitments, on our desires, on our proclamations. So to me, that's what the story of Palm Sunday means. That's the story I take away from it is what do we do after the enthusiasm wanes? We can leave out the historical part. We can leave out the posturing, if you will, and the positioning of the religions to go into another geographical territory. But this idea that we get excited, and then in a short time we are no longer excited, is a lesson to me worth exploring. Now, I've told you this before. In the nights of the round table, the questing for the Holy Grail was a quest for the soul. It is a quest to experience the presence of God within us. That is the symbolism there. They were not looking for a cup, you know, Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. We're not looking for a chalice. They're looking for the very presence of God within. That is what the knights are questing for. And remember, there are knights. They are disciplined. They work out. They have to go on this quest at their own expense. They have to raise their own money. They have to buy their own horses. They have to train to joust and fight and do all the things that are going to be expected of them if they're going to complete this quest. But they're dedicated to this quest. Their lives are committed to the quest, and they must complete the quest or die. Right? Remember, in Buddhism, the Buddha sat under the tree and said, I will sit here until I am enlightened or I will die. There's this commitment. There's this quest. And in one of the stories, the knight goes off and he finds the holy city. He defeats all of the opponents that he meets on the way. The opponents are our own ideas, right? The things within us that would distract us and keep us from our journey. And the knight defeats them all, and he goes to the holy city, and they welcome him with a great parade, and they make him the king of the city. But a page comes and knocks on the door and says, "Sir Knight, have you forgotten? You've got business unattended to back at Camelot, and you must take care of this." And the knight says to the people of the holy city, he says, "Don't worry, I'm going to go back to Camelot. I'm going to take care of some loose ends, and then I'll be back." And of course he goes back to Camelot, and he gets sucked back into his old ways, his old life, and he forgets about the holy city. And he never goes back. And we are each like that, each and every one of us. We get excited, we get enthusiastic, we get ready to move. We want this to be the year that we're going to have the best spiritual garden we have ever had in our whole life. But we allow ourselves to be distracted. Excuse me. So what do we do when the enthusiasm wanes? What is the difference between those people who are able to keep on keeping on, to continue doing the things that they need to do long after the excitement of making the commitment has passed? What is it? And it's perseverance. It is just simply doing the basics, the things that need to be done. We were told in China that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. You have to start. You have to put one foot in front of the other. Don't worry about, am I going to make the next 999 miles? Take the first step. Do what you can do with what you have right where you are. I think that was Franklin Roosevelt, maybe Teddy. Do what you can with what you have right where you are. Take one step and put it in front of the other. When I was in the Army, they would teach us to march, and the way they taught us to march was we paid attention to our feet. You called out left, right, left, and you always started on the left foot. Everybody moved their left foot at the same time. And in order to keep us doing it, we sang little cadence songs. Go to your left, your right, your left, go to your left, your right. And as you were doing that, your left foot was going down at the right time, your right foot was going down at the right time. And by simply doing the basics, by simply doing the basic things, we were able to get from where we were to where we needed to go, which sometimes was a great distance, by just paying attention. You see, life is a matter of intention and attention. What is it that you want, and is your mind focused on that? What is it that you want, and is your mind focused on that? And when we learn to meditate, we learn that our mind is kind of like a stray dog. It just wanders all over the place, and we follow it. Can you imagine getting up in the morning and saying, "This is the day that I'm going to dedicate everything I do and everything that I am this day for the purpose of discovering my soul. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to let the dog out of the yard, and I'm just going to follow it wherever it goes." But that's what we do with our minds, with our undisciplined minds. They wander all over the place, and we follow them. And what we have to learn how to do is to have intention and attention. What is it that I want this day? I want to have a deeper experience of the love and the presence of God. And then what am I giving my attention to? So as ideas of anger come up, instead of becoming involved in the anger, instead of becoming angry, we can say, "Oh, look, here comes anger. I wonder where it came from. I wonder where it's going. I wonder who it's for. Not mine. I let it go." And by simply becoming the observer instead of the actor of the anger, we can just allow it to go. Why do we do that? Because we don't want to give our attention to anger. We want to give our attention to the love and to the presence of God. So some things that we can do to help ourselves keep our intention and to keep our attention where we want it to be is, first of all, we have to renew our enthusiasm. We have to remind ourselves that this is the most important thing we're ever going to do. The most important thing you're ever going to do is to discover more of God within you. And you're going to be doing that forever. Not just this week, not just this month, not just this Easter season, but forever. The most important thing that we're ever going to experience. You know, when we first come into the ideas, you know, we kind of look for the physical benefits of it. Better job, better pay. Maybe we even want God to punish the people we don't like. We're looking to use religion to have a better human experience. We understand the words that said, seek first the kingdom and all these things will be added to you. See, the disciples were saying, where am I going to get the money to pay the rent? You know, I've got to recaulk the boat this year. I have to put a new coat of paint on it. Where's this money going to come from? And Jesus said, come follow me. Seek first the kingdom. Everything else will be added unto you. So we come into a teaching such as ours, and we think, oh, look at the great benefits I'm going to get from it. I'm going to get more stuff and better stuff and have a better life. And eventually we learn that it's not about the stuff, you see. It's never about the stuff. We only thought it was about the stuff. But it's about coming to know God. Dr. Holmes told us, with all you're getting, get God. There comes a time when you stop worrying about the mundane things of life and you only want to be at home with the beloved. And that's what I'm talking about, wanting to be at home with the beloved. So the first thing that we can do is, if our enthusiasm starts to wane, is set up a discipline, set up a ritual if necessary. You know, in the Army you were taught discipline, in the Navy you were taught discipline. You do certain things at certain times because it teaches you to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And do you have a ritual that you can take time every day in order to remind yourself that the most important thing that I'm ever going to do this day is to experience the love and the presence of God wherever I go, in me, as me, and through me. To fan that desire within us to a passion so great that we want nothing else, that nothing else matters. There's nothing else to have, there's nothing else worth having. Take time to renew that commitment. The other thing that we can do is we can remind ourselves of the impermanence of all that we see, of everything around us. In some of the Buddhist traditions, when the adherents would come, when the monks would come and want to study, what the teachers would do is have them go down to the burning grounds. In those societies, they burned your dead out in the open along the banks of a river. And when somebody died, the family would carry the body down there and they would put the body on the funeral pyre and cremate it. And the adherents would go and just sit there and meditate, and they would just watch the bodies burn. And this purpose of this was to instill upon them the idea that this is all impermanent. Everything that you see is turning to dust. The body that you're using is turning to dust. The house that you live in is turning to dust. The cars that you drive are turning to rust. Everything is going away. Everything is going away. So why should we give our time and attention to that which is going away? Why should we be overly obsessed with driving the most expensive car or living in the biggest house and all those sorts of things that we have to give our time and our energy to make money to pay for these things, when it could be time and energy that we're using for our spiritual growth? So if we come back and we recognize that all of this is turning to dust, everything is going away, we must ask ourselves then, well, what's the purpose? What's the use? Why bother? And it reminds us that there's a part of us, the observer, the witness to all of this, that isn't going away. You know, the body I had when I was 2 years old is long gone, turned to dust. And the body that I have now someday is going to be turned to dust. But what remains is the witness, the observer, the one who was there to see that 2-year-old body, to experience it, and the one who is here now to see and to experience this 64-year-old body. So if everything is impermanent, can we remind ourselves to focus on that which is important, which is permanent? So the next time we get interested in getting sucked into the drama of the world, the news, the politics, the crisis of the day and all of these things, can we bring ourselves back to say, God is all there is. I will focus on that which is most important. Now that doesn't mean that we're not compassionate, because compassion and empathy are things that ignite within us, ignite the desire for unity. So we can have compassion, we can be empathetic, we can recognize that there is pain and there is suffering in this world right here and right now. But we can recognize that it is here right now because of the erroneous ideas that the human consciousness holds. And we can rededicate ourselves to erasing the errors of thought. And we do that in the only place that we can work, within our own consciousness, through our spiritual practice. So just as we've been using the metaphor of the garden for the last month, and we've been talking about, if you want to have a garden, you have to make a decision as to what you will plant. You have to prepare the soil. You have to plant the seeds according to their own nature. Some go deeper than others, some go farther apart, some go in the ground earlier when the ground is cooler, and some go in the ground later. Some have to be raised in a greenhouse environment, and then later the plants themselves move to the garden. But we have to cooperate with a particular seed, and we have to plant them in the right order, in the right time. And we have to approach our spiritual growth with the same discipline. As I said a couple weeks ago, the 7 chakra system from the East kind of gives us an order in which to transcend from the human to the divine, to move beyond the base needs, to move beyond lust, to move beyond anger and willpower, and to move up into the heart, which is love, which is where we first encounter the soul. All animals struggle to survive. All animals have to procreate. All animals fight for dominance. When we engage in life at only those levels, which is politics and soap operas and the news and all of those things. But when we stay stuck at those levels, we are doing nothing to move ourselves out of the animal kingdom. Nothing wrong with animals. It just means that we have not yet moved into our spiritual nature. But when we move into the heart, when we move into love, when we start to sow the seeds of love, then we can start to experience the love and the presence of God within us. So I suggest then that each day is a sacred day. Each day is a day for us to renew our commitment. Each day is a day for us to stop and remember what is really important. Is it the meeting I have to go to? Is it the sale I have to close? Is it the bills I have to pay? Or is it discovering my soul and sharing what I have discovered with all who want to hear about it? So we don't want to turn our backs. We don't want to go back to our old ways. When Spirit calls, when something within us quickens, when something in our heart says, yes, yes, for this purpose I have come. I am here to discover the presence of God within. And that is the only thing that matters. When our heart hears the call, we must persevere so that when the enthusiasm wanes, we don't lose interest. We must remind ourselves every day of our quest, of our discipline. We must do our practices. If necessary, create a special place in your home. Some people build little altars just to remind themselves. Perhaps a stick of incense to remind ourselves that what we're doing is a ritual of reminding ourselves of the presence of God. We can start every day. I sent something out for those who are on Facebook, might have seen it. but it's something from the Dalai Lama, and I don't recall it all, but I'll just give you the beginning, which is when your eyes open in the morning, say, I have woken up. I have precious human life. It is a gift. Today I'm not going to waste it. I will be kind. I will be loving. And I refuse to speak badly of others. I think if we could do that or something similar every day as we awaken, to just remind ourselves, my God, I'm here. I'm here. It's a gift. I will use it for the growth of my soul. If we remind ourselves of how important that is, if we remind ourselves that everything else around us is turning to dust, and we will focus on that which perseveres, the soul, then I think we will find that our progress this year will significantly exceed all and any of the previous years. The love of God has created each and every one of us out of itself. It has left us alone to make the discovery. It has placed the desire to know us it has placed the desire to know it in our hearts. And when we are blessed to hear its call, we must answer. The immutableness of God, the inevitableness of God is within us, calling us home to it. This is the year that we don't put down the palm branches, but we continue to wave them all year. This is the year that we don't turn our backs and go back to our old ways. But this is the year that we consider ourselves to be on a quest with discipline, with stay power, doing the only thing that we can possibly do, allowing our hearts to open up to the love and the presence of God that is already here. You are the knights of the round table. I wish you well on your quest. And so it is.